This is The Dime, a 10-minute dive into the cannabis and hemp industry through trends, insights, predictions, and tangents.
What's up, guys? This is The Dime. This week, we are breaking down Cannabis Mythbusters 2 Quality Control Style. This is the podcast that gives you the blended perspective of the business and science. As always, I'm joined by Kellan, and this week we have the fortunate time of Evan Friedmann. Evan, you want to give a little background on yourself?
Hi, Bryan. Great to be here. So I'm Evan Friedmann. I am Vice President of Hellma USA, and we are involved in the optical analysis industry. So we use light to measure the chemical aspects of laboratory samples and process manufacturing in industries stretching from pharma to petrochemical, food and beverage, agriculture, and cannabis.
Awesome. Let's get into the topic. Like every consumable product, one would assume that cannabis, along with its derivative products, needs to be vigorously tested, not only to ensure that the product is safe and free of contamination, but also to inform the buyer of the content of the product they are about to consume. With the addition of 5 newly legalized states into the market, once again, cannabis experts are looking for standardization to improve product safety, consistency, and predictability. With that being said, Evan, what is one misconception consumers have about the cannabis quality control industry?
Well, I think one misconception is that quality is based entirely on THC content. And the more THC there is, the higher quality it is. I think that is a general perception amongst the wide consumer base out there. And I'm not really sure how accurate that is. In the last several years, there's been a lot of research into what's been dubbed the entourage effect, or the interplay between not just THC, but all the cannabinoids, as well as the various terpenes, of which over 100 different terpenes have been identified in cannabis plants, and even the flavonoids and some of the lesser compounds that we don't even talk about could be influencing the overall experience and medicinal effects that an individual gets from a plant. So labeling it with just the THC value isn't really useful for the consumer.
Yeah, I mean, I think that probably the biggest misconception is, as it relates to labeling and quality control, is that there is a robust quality control system implemented in these cannabis companies. And I just don't think that's the case yet. A lot of these companies aren't even required to follow normal CGMP practices that other food industries and nutraceutical industries that are federally legal have to follow, right, in order to manufacture a consumable product for the general population. And so you kind of have this patchwork of companies throughout every different state that some are following it to a T, some are kind of cutting some corners where they can to save costs, and it creates a large spectrum of different products that hit the market. And I mean, it's pretty relevant. There's been a ton of different studies that people have gone out and even CBD, right? You can go purchase 10, 15 different products of CBD and look at the labels, and they say one thing, and then when they get them into the labs and start doing the testing on them, and it's not even close to what the labels are saying. So there's some really good articles out there that kind of are studies, if you will, that highlight that. And so I think at the end of the day, that is kind of where the industry is, right? It's just the labels. It's 80% of the companies out there, you can't trust the labels.
Does that mean, in your opinion, Kellan, that when you purchase edibles, there's a chance out of the 10 gummies in there, one of them might not be up to the quote-unquote standard of the back of the label?
I think that for the most part, those days are probably behind us in more mature states. You will see that as an issue in kind of some of the emerging states, some of these new states that just came online, if they have operators that are new to the space. But right now, I think that that's kind of behind us. A lot of these states are MSOs now, and they've kind of figured out how to avoid those kind of problems, if you will. What do you think, Evan?
I think you also have to draw a distinction between marijuana and hemp, because the way CBD or hemp cannabinoids are regulated and managed, they're mostly not. And there's a lot more product being produced there and a lot more hands in there, and so there's a lot more opportunity for fraud. I think the marijuana edibles, especially the edibles, they have testing protocols in these established states. I mean, these 5 new markets are yet to be seen, but in these established states, I don't think if you're buying something that's based on an extract, I think you can trust the certificate, the label, a lot more, because of the homogenized nature of the material as opposed to the plant material itself.
Yeah, and I think another good point there is, or another point to make, is that the consequences for not getting the concentrations of cannabinoids right in the THC space is a lot more significant than not getting them right in the CBD, right? Like, you get one gummy with 10 times as much THC in it, that individual is going to have one heck of a good time, or a good time.
Or a bad time. Or a bad time.
So let's break that down, Kellan. How do they currently monitor that to make sure that they're within those established potency limits?
That is a good question. I'm not actually 100% sure on how that is achieved through food chemistry applications, but I would imagine it's some sort of they test the mixture in process, and within food chemistry, there's got to be some robust homogenization methods. I'm not familiar with it, honestly. What do you think, Evan? Are you familiar with something like that?
So I am not directly familiar, but based on some experience, I can take an educated guess at what it might look like. You know, making gelatin is done at an elevated temperature, which helps with the viscosity of the extract that's being used to formulate the food chemistry. And then when the temperature is brought down, it sets. So it would strike me that they could probably mix all the gelatin ingredients and the cannabinoids together to make the final blend that they then put into molds and set. And it would be easy enough to take a sample from that homogenized batch.
Yeah, and so that is exactly how they do it. I was talking to Sean about this, right? I just don't know how they test for quality, right? You know what I mean? So like I was talking to my buddy Sean, and we were talking about how Wild does it. Actually, Wild's based in Portland, if you guys were wondering.
Yeah, it's Wild with a Y, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I know these guys.
Another company called Sentia, right? So these
two. No free advertising.
It's actually a really interesting case study, if you will. So Wild, they both mix them in huge hoppers, right? All the ingredients go in. They mix it up for like 45 minutes. They take a sample out probably and send that to the lab to make sure it tests at the correct concentration. And then what Wild does is they then have individuals pour it into beakers, and they go pour individual molds, right? Versus Sentia pours it onto a massive skid.
Yeah, right? Sure.
And then the machine just punches them out. Pretty wild. But my point is that I don't know where the QA/QC is in that process to make sure that as you're pouring the gelatin mixture in the lab, like how do you know that it's staying homogenized within that hopper, right? And so I have no idea what they're doing. And I mean, I think that could be potentially an application where a spectroscopy could be implemented there, right? Maybe put a sensor that could measure those. Is that even possible, Evan?
Absolutely. You know, in the pharma space, you can look at a line that's making tablets for people to take. very similar to how you'd look at this gummy bear manufacturing line, where the materials are either being pressed or whatever. The way in pharma it's done is, or traditionally done, they would steal some of those gummy bears coming off the line and send them to the lab to analyze. And it would take days. And, you know, what would they find out? If they found one out of the 20 gummy bears they pulled had too much or too little outside of there, well, what are you going to do? That batch is already made and the bears are mixed together. How are you going to pick them out? You can't unscramble an egg. But what could be done is at that point where the material is being poured into the molds, before the nozzle that actually distributes it, you can install an optical sensor, and we would use a known quantity of a known spectrum of light. We'd shine it through the material, and we would detect how much of that light is left after it goes through the material. And whatever is missing has been absorbed by the chemistry inside the material. Different chemistries absorb different wavelengths of light, and we can look at the pattern of what we get back compared to what we sent and determine how much of the various elements of interest are in the sample. In this case, it would be THC or CBD, and we'd want to make sure that the number is steady as it flows past the sample, at which point we'd know that it's generally homogeneous.
I think that's a great breakdown, and I think it's funny, right? The batch loss, and when an organization loses a batch, then it looks to implement these sensors, where Kellan and I scream from the rooftop, put the instrumentation in place prior, because if you lose the batch, that's a lost sunk cost, and then you have to invest in the instrumentation, an additional cost. So now you're out how much, versus if you just instituted the sensors beforehand, you've got yourself monitoring the process, saving your batch, and probably saving resources, costs.
Right. You haven't even accounted for the amount of time you've lost going through, I'm going to set up, I'm going to make a bunch of stuff, I'm going to make 3 good batches, and then I'm going to have a terrible one. And now I have to go and figure out what I'm doing to ameliorate that situation. You've lost a year, like a whole year, probably.
And probably tons of capital.
Yeah.
And it's you've seen this with all the other industries that you're implementing these sensors in, and it's only a matter of time before cannabis is like, I can understand what's going on in real time. I can make these adjustments. I can make sure that my product is within acceptable quality standards that we adhere to.
Absolutely. I think cannabis is actually a really well-positioned market to take on this technology into its landscape, run with it, and do phenomenally, because the cannabis industry has this sort of like Silicon Valley tech feel to it in a lot of ways. The way it attracts money and drives sort of non-traditional business models, although there's plenty of traditional business models too. And I think that a hot application or a series of hot applications based on good high technology could really fit very nicely into the cannabis industry really quickly. And within 5 to 10 years, we could see one of the most efficient chemical manufacturing operations in the world.
The one challenge I wonder if people will hear this and then believe, who needs to be running this piece of instrument? How can we implement it? Do we need to have a scientist on site in order to handle this? What's the best path in order to kind of integrate this into our process?
So I will start by saying, shameless plug alert. You do not need a scientist on staff. We at Helma can bring our scientific expertise and do the development needed to implement these sensors into a wide variety of processes in the cannabis, in the hemp space, in the further down the value chain, in formulation of final product, in so everywhere from extraction to the end. And we can build up the application for you. You don't need the scientist on hand. The equipment, once in place, is simple enough to operate, and the insights can be gleaned from that.
Can you share some insight on return on investments you've seen from other industries?
In industries where they have to do HPLC-based QA/QC throughout a manufacturing process, including certification at the end, it typically takes about a year to start showing profit on your investments. And that's calculated by looking at the cost of the consumables you use in the HPLC testing over that time, and the cost of the laboratory staff and their continuing education and all the other costs that go into that. And the idea is these are otherwise highly trained individuals, and they're doing the same test over and over and over again for you. They could be doing more research and developing next generation products and ideas, but instead they're doing rote tasks that don't even need to be done offline, that can be done continuously and leveraged into big data insights and control schemes.
That's really interesting. So let's hop into the prediction time. When do we expect to see sensors, for the first guess, in process in the cannabis industry? How quickly?
Well, I'd say that there's at least one out there already. And there have been some other companies that have tried and left the space. But sensors from our group we can launch with off-the-shelf product that we have to develop with you right away, or we can custom tailor a solution to a specific application, and that development cycle is probably 9 to 18 months. So I'd say, by 2023, we should start seeing growing adoption in the space.
So let's take it one step further. Kellan's year of 2024, when cannabis is federally legal. Is this considered mandatory? Is this regulated to the point where everyone has it instituted in their process? And if not, what percentage of the industry has adopted in-house QA/QC?
I love this question. And it's really interesting, right? Because what does federal legalization look like? Is cannabis going to be regulated as medicine? Is it going to be regulated by the FDA? Because then, yeah, this shit is mandatory. Because it doesn't make any sense to establish a static on or off-site QA/QC lab in a manufacturing operation anymore. So if it's regulated like nutraceuticals, then there's going to need to be a lot of it, but it doesn't have to be everywhere. And it doesn't have to be at every stage in the operation. If it's going to be regulated like it is in some states and not others, maybe this isn't mandatory, and it's only the companies that are in tune enough with their business and their metrics that they see the efficiency gains and what that means for their overall quality and brand position.
percentage
that's
number of companies operating with internal QA/QC, and then Kellan,
in 2024,
2024.
12.
12%?
12%. Yikes.
You don't think it's not going to be taken up that robustly?
Well, I guess Kellan and I will be different. Kellan,
I
80%, and not because of regulatory stand. I mean, I think that all of those are excellent points, but at the end of the day, I think there's a huge value add, right? Being able to make those changes on the fly and see things in real time, if you will. And I think that as this race to the bottom continues in terms of pricing for this commodity, and it will become a commodity in my opinion.
Oh, for sure.
Companies are they're gonna do this whole street fight for retail space and all these other things, and then there's gonna be kind of a standard price for a product, right? Like you go to the store and a 6-pack of beer is pretty standard across the board, whether it's Heineken or Coors, or there's maybe a little price difference, but those little price differences, I think, are going to be negligible to the
Consumer.
To the consumer, but also from a business's bottom line. I think that companies are going to implement this because they're going to be trying to pinch pennies and get that extra % profit margins all over the board, and this is something that provides that advantage over everyone else in the space to hit certain numbers and increase your margins, you know?
So yeah, absolutely. I agree with
80%.
I agree with everything you've said. I guess my number came from a little bit more of a pragmatist standpoint, and convincing people to take on new technologies isn't always the easiest thing. And I also think between now and 2024, there will be a whole lot of new companies joining the fray. They might not be here in 2026, but between now and 2024, I think there will be a lot of additional new companies spinning up.
So while optimist Bryan thinks 80% is spot on, realistic Bryan thinks closer to 65%. I think people will adopt the technology slowly, and once they adopt it, they'll be loyalists, because from a numeric standpoint, it makes a ton of sense. If you're saving money by purchasing this equipment and it pays for itself between 6 and 12 months, everything after 12 is profit. And that's a huge value add for some of these companies, knowing that they're adhering to a high quality standards that they know when they produce a product is keeping the consumer safe, because at the end of the day, a recall is detrimental and it can kill you. And if that's where they're operating with the risk of the unknown, and they can alleviate that by implementing real-time sensors, it's a no-brainer. The hardest part is going to be the early adoption, as always with new technology, but with the expectation that these big MSOs are really exploding fast, the one thing that they can look to do is implement other industry technology. And it's not like sensors or new technology per se. It's not like they're automated AI with all these other new technologies. It's a tried and true piece of hardware.
Even the automated AI aspects with this process technology isn't brand new. They've been working on machine learning for these kinds of measurements for at least half a decade. So it's really, the technology is ready. Definitely. And it's just going to take the first few people to really see the advantages and prove out the financial advantages in this space. But I mean, you're absolutely right.
Should you just shout out Curaleaf right now? Should you just say it? Hey, Curaleaf, we're ready for you.
Oh, Curaleaf. Not all the others.
I figured if we were going to start on East Coast Love, they'd be a good one to start with.
Yeah, maybe I should call out Acreage too.
So, real quick, Ev, for the people in the industry that are intrigued, they want to know more, they're interested in figuring out how to put together a first step, where would you tell them to reach you? How can they get in touch with you?
I can be reached at evan.friedman@helma.com. I'm sure that we'll include that in the notes on the post. You can find us at Hellma.com, or I don't know, you can call us anytime. 516-939-0888.
What about Instagram? Do you guys have a social handle that they can go follow you guys on?
No.
Well, that was simple.
I would say the easiest way to get in touch with Evan back in our older life is just to close your eyes at a trade show and listen. And you will find him. But now it's very hard to find him since he is not there.
I have yet to leave New York since March.
Well, when the world comes back to normal, they can all find you.
They can all find me. I'm at the shows.
Cool.
I'm at the shows. I'm on the airwaves. You call me. I'm happy to talk to anybody about almost anything. So
awesome. We'll put it all in the show notes and we'll break it down. Thanks for your time, Evan.
Thank you, guys. It was a pleasure being here.
Awesome.